Good afternoon, everyone. I am sorry to have to force you to listen to English because Estonian sounds great, I have to say. All I can say is tere and aita. I didn't learn much over the summer. I also wanted to thank Andres for making this possible. And Anu, if I wouldn't have been able to see Anu Lil, I maybe wouldn't have come. She's a wonderful writer. And Swedbank as well. I would tell you that based on my meetings with Andres in Zurich, I think that Swedbank, although I can't read everything that's in Swedish, but it's a group that understands very, very well the principles of value investing that I've been living for the last 25 years. And so before I get into, I decided, often I give talks, and if any of you saw me in the summer festival, I just spoke without slides, but I wanted to try once with slides. And I wanted to give people here a sense of what I'm like when I talk to my investors and what I share with them. That changes over time. I see and I understand that it's a conference for individual investors. I see a number of women in the room. I see a number of people who certainly have portfolios of their own that they manage. And so you are probably not that different to my investors. I have about 150 investors, all of them individual families. So we'll go through not all of the slides that I would do in my annual partnership meeting, but some of them. Before I go there, I just want to share a couple of thoughts on Estonia, as I understand it, and to share a little bit about my life story. So I have an Israeli passport. My father was born in Israel, although I was born in South Africa. And I used to think that I was part of a small country. When I was born, Israel had a population of 5 or 6 million. Now the population is pushing 10 million, which is approximately like that of Switzerland. And in comparison to Estonia, that is huge. Estonia is such a small place. But when I started investing and I had money from family that came from Israel, a lot of people started asking me, Guy, why aren't you investing in Israel? Why aren't you showing a patriotism to invest in Israel? And at first I would feel quite defensive, and I would look at companies in Israel. And then I would also look at companies in Israel, and increasingly there were companies that were based in Israel but had assets overseas. And I came to a new understanding for people in small countries, which I wanted to share with you. I think it's really important. So I didn't understand a lot about the last presentation, but it's a company that clearly owns assets mainly in Estonia. Certainly people here should consider investing. But it's really, really important that investors from around the world invest in companies that are listed in Estonia, companies that have assets in Estonia. In a certain way, it is part of Estonia's national security that pension funds and other investment corporations have investments here, because it gives a financial interest to it's not just that Estonia is part of the EU. It's not just that it's part of the West, but foreign investors own assets here. They want to take care of the assets. They have an interest in it. On the other side, also very, very important, is that one is not being disloyal if one invests outside of Estonia. Not just that, it's actually really, really important for savers, pension funds, and individuals to have assets out of Estonia. It creates more financial security because one's financial future is not just tied to the future of the country. And I used to have conversations with pension funds in Israel who would have the same issues arising. And so just a sense of that integration between Estonia and the rest of the world is really important. Maybe that's obvious to you. It wasn't to me. I would just tell you one other thing before I dive into my presentation and take some water. The 240 hostages and are on my mind the whole time. I would not be able to stand here and talk without at least mentioning them. I'm also very, very concerned for many, many innocent people in Gaza. And here's a request to you, because you may not have thought about it. If you have friends in Israel, give them a call or send them an email. Tell them you're thinking about them. You cannot believe, in the time of the crisis, what kind of connection that will make for you to them. They will really appreciate it. And the same thing if you have friends in Gaza, or if you have friends in the Middle East who are deeply concerned, don't hide away from it. Engage and reach out. You don't have to take sides. Humans are, first of all, humans. And there's a sense of isolation that one feels when something like what is going on in Israel, Palestine, Gaza is going on. And so don't hide. Reach out and show that you care. It'll help. So thank you for that quick introduction. I'm now going to take some water because I'm thirsty. So we'll just pause a second here. And my mouth is getting dry. So what did I have here? How are we doing? Is everybody okay? Does everybody understand me? Can you hear me? So we will go on this till, how long do I have? Till another 45 minutes. Oh, I can bore you guys silly in 45 minutes. That's just, so I started investing 25 years ago. I fell in love with Warren Buffett. I discovered Warren Buffett. And I figured out that if I could get some money to manage, and I found friends and family, initially my father was my first investor, then it would lead me to having not a bad life. And so I'm going to take you through some of the principles, not all of them, that I am seeking to live my life by. They were recently turned into a booklet, and if you're very, very nice to somebody in my office, we may be able to get you a copy. But that's up to how nice you are to the people in my office. I want to pause as well and share one other thing. And this is just a thought that has come up for me that I've fully understood recently. It's as a result of reading the work of an academic called Gad Saad. And thinking about different kinds of minds. So Daniel Kahneman has talked about thinking fast and thinking slow. There's a thought process where we think slowly and carefully about something, come to a reasoned conclusion. And then there's knee-jerk reactions that we have when we do social media, when our spouse yells at us, when a share price moves rather dramatically. That is a distinction that we all should be aware of. Those of us who've read the book certainly will be aware of it. But to bring it up, I want to give you another distinction that I did not realize how significant it is. And there are people of both types in the room. So on the one hand, there is the rational type. They're really, really good with numbers. They can add and subtract and do all sorts of other things, usually not very in touch with their emotions. I suspect that the majority of people in this room are of that type, analytical, number-oriented. I am that kind of person, but I did not understand the degree to which there are other people who are not that type of person. And the other type of person is somebody who is usually far better in touch with their emotions. They're far better at telling stories. I'm not very good at telling stories. And there are some people in that group who, even if they got through, and I hope I'm not insulting anyone here, even if they got through high school maths, for them, numbers just float on a page. It's not their thing. And I have people I love dearly in my family who are like that. And it's totally fine to be that way. There are other qualities that are really, really important. But what I realize is that if you're that kind of person for whom numbers float on a page, or if you're married to somebody like that, or if you have somebody like that in your life, it's not a terrible thing. Just be aware of it and understand that you have a different set of qualities. The investment game in general is won by people of an analytical mindset. And those of us who do have an analytical mindset have a really, really hard time realizing that there are other people who don't. And those of us with an analytical mindset, it's been a 20-year journey in my marriage to learn that there is another view of the world which is not just equally important. In a sense, it's more important. It's the way you bring good children into the world. It's the way you show mercy in courts. It's a whole bunch of other things, and we need to learn that side. Why is this relevant in this room? Because I see men and women, I see husbands and wives, it's a diverse group, and it's just something that I've learned recently. So that was my thoughts on Estonia, which I just gave you. And so what actually are we doing here? Why are we here? So if we've been successful enough not to spend all of the money that we've made, then how are we going to invest it? What are we going to do with it? And my message to all of you in the room, but especially to the analytical people, the goal here is to compound money, and I'm going to take you through some elements of compounding. To give you a sense, my father is amazing with relationships. Really incredible. I'm not so good. I realize only in the last 2 or 3 years that numbers, he's the type, and he runs a very successful business in the UK. He's the type who says, I buy for 2, I add 2%, and I sell for 4, and somehow it works, literally. And it took my father maybe a decade of being invested with me to start understanding the power of compounding and what it can do for you. He did not understand until that point. So those are my returns. It's not, but the most important thing to see there is not the difference between me and the S&P 500. It's that $1 million in 1997 turned into almost $10 million. Or $10 million turned into $100 million. And that is what we're looking to achieve. That is what I believe people in this room should be looking to achieve. That is the goal that we're here to get to. Maybe we can do slightly better. Maybe we can do slightly worse. I see Andres looking at me and nodding. Andres can help you. I just want you to know that. So what's the point here? And I'm just going to move on. I can go back to that if you like. And I share this slide with my investors every year. So we have along the left-hand column there, I just realized I have it down here. I don't have to turn. That's good. We have along the left-hand column the number of years of operation. And we have along the top line, we have the rates of return annualized for various different indices, and in this case, Aker Marine Fund is in there. The really important thing to look at is that at 25 years, so even if you were invested in the FTSE 100, you would have more than doubled your money. You would have had a lot more money than you started with. And if you can do better than that, if you can do 7 or 8%, you can end up with almost 10 times your original investment. 10 times. And that is what we're looking to do. That is the goal. If I end up, I am now 57 years old. I could be doing this for another 25 years, and I might end up with 77 or so times the original investment if I continue the way I'm going. That is an astounding result. And believe me, I am not the smartest guy doing this. I'm not the most successful guy doing this. I was sitting in a presentation of a classmate of mine, Chris Hahn, who was my year at business school. He runs something called the Children's Investment Fund, TCI. He has an annualized rate of return of 16 or 17%, I believe. It's insane amounts of money, but you don't need to have insane amounts. You can be quite close to the indices and still do extraordinarily well. If you take one thing away from this, from my talk, remember that, and realize, those of you who really get it on the numbers front, that you are not going to be able to convince necessarily, this is going to be a really sexist distinction. But in my case, I realize that my father and my wife don't get the numbers side of it. The point here is, if you're somebody who gets it, don't try and convince somebody who doesn't get it what is going on here. The best thing maybe to do is to get them to trust you and say, please let me take care of this side of things. So we got that. This is something I put up to my investors every year, and this shows my returns on an annual basis since the inception of the fund. And what is absolutely key here to see, so I've done well over 25 years, but there are periods that have been just horrible, absolutely horrible. And if we look at, I'm turning against you, I shouldn't do that, should I? I can look down here. If we look at, so we have some years which felt great, like if you look at 2002, I was down 1.7%, and the S&P was down 22%. So I was net against the index positive. And then you have years like 2006, which felt absolutely great. My God, I was a genius and a hero, wasn't I? But then you also have years like 2008, where I was 10% worse than the index. Or you can even have years like 2015, where I had a bankruptcy in my portfolio, and I was 15% worse than the index. But here's the most important point. I didn't give up. I didn't stop. I didn't say, oh, I'm done with investing, I'm going to go and do something else. And the most important thing in the game is to stay in the game. Stay in the game, be in the investments that can compound. If you can stay in the game, you will end up winning. And the key is to make sure that you don't do any of the things that would kick you out of the game. And I believe that I've become far more conservative over time because I am so afraid of doing things that might kick me out of the game. The worst thing, what is my luck in a certain way, is that 2015, a bankruptcy in my portfolio, some people might have given up. And some people might have had investors who gave up on them. And that would have ended the compounding. It no longer would have continued. And the key is to stay in the game. And yeah, so I will stop preaching. Maybe I'm preaching to the choir. So embrace adversity. Realize every single person here is going to have, none of us are angels, none of us are gods, none of us are prophets. We're going to have, no matter how hard we try, we're going to have moments when we have our heads handed to us, when the thing that we never expected to happen happens, and we feel discouraged. And that is when we have to figure out how to keep going and understand we're no different to any other person doing this. The difference is the people who stick around and the people who don't. How do you stay in the game? How do you make sure that you can be there for a long time? So my philosophy is that I don't want to speculate. I want to own businesses that are going to be around for 100 years, 50 years, that are going to be at the core of our civilization. And I would tell you, coming from Israel, and I also grew up in Iran a little bit, we who come from the periphery, so the United States is the arsenal of democracy. The United States, for me, is the center of our freedoms. We all care, I care deeply about what is going on in the United States, because without the United States, I'm not sure that the free, liberal world holds together. Many of the best businesses in the world are already based in the United States. And if not, they're not in the United States, they're in Western Europe. We want to own those businesses. And I say we, those of us in the room who live on the periphery, we should not think that just because we live in Estonia or in Israel or in Switzerland, that we cannot own the best businesses in the world and look for them wherever they are, especially if they're based in Western Europe or North America. And this is me taking you through this. But this is what I wanted to do here, is just share with you and talk through a little bit what my portfolio looks like. And I hope this is fun for you as it is for me. So Berkshire Hathaway is 20% of the portfolio. I bought the shares that I own in Berkshire Hathaway in the period 1999 to 2002. I've not bought a single share since, and I've not sold a single share. And so we can dive into what Berkshire Hathaway is and why it's an extraordinary business, but just to give you a brief sense, Berkshire Hathaway owns power plants and power-producing assets across the United States. It owns all sorts of infrastructure-type assets. When you own Berkshire Hathaway, you own kind of like a piece of the United States, if you like. And as we know, it's centered in Omaha. I've not bought or sold a share in Berkshire Hathaway. The investment is not just there because it earns a return for me. It's there because it influences my mindset. It also helps me to face the world and to face uncertainty in the world because there can be volatility, and it gives me a sense of security. I'm not going to go through these in order, but I'm going to go down to the investment in Nestlé. So Nestlé is 3% of the portfolio. I've owned that since the inception of the fund. So when the fund started, just brief sort of story, is that I took over a portfolio, and that portfolio held Nestlé shares in it. There were other things in that portfolio that I sold, like UBS, interestingly enough. But I just held on to the shares of Nestlé. Nestlé is based in Switzerland, but something the people, I don't want to, I keep catching myself because I feel like I'm about to sound sexist. So those of us in the room who prepare food for our families, often it's the women, but I shouldn't be sexist. Go look in your cupboard at home and see how many products in your cupboard are made by Nestlé. And if you're not the one who prepares the food, and I'm not in my family, go look and see. And if you're at a friend's house, go look and see. And if you're interested, familiarize yourselves with the brands that Nestlé controls. Now, Nestlé has not done anywhere near as well as Berkshire Hathaway has for me in the portfolio. The approximate size of the positions was about the same. But I'm not really concerned. It's given me extraordinary ability to stick with it. When in 2008, for example, when the markets were going haywire, I had investors calling me up. I would ask them the question, and it was a great example, do you think that people are going to stop buying food? Do you think that people are going to stop using their Nespresso capsules? Do you think that people are going to stop eating Kit Kat bars? It helped me, and literally I've not been trading, I've not been doing some smart thing, I've just been sitting there collecting the dividend, watching them repurchase shares, and watching the business gradually grow, very, very gradually. So then I'll just talk through a couple more here. MasterCard is 7% of the portfolio. So I would suspect that in this room, at least 50%, if not 80% of the people in the room have a credit card with the MasterCard logo on it. MasterCard is one of two payment networks, or there are a couple more in the West, the other one being Visa, without which any company that wants to get into payment systems, whether it's PayPal, whether it's Revolut, at the end of the day, those companies want to be paid. And the way they get paid is becoming a part of either the MasterCard network or the Visa network. It's a piece of financial infrastructure. It's a piece of the world's business that I very, very strongly urge people in this room to consider owning for generations. It'll be around in another 50 or 100 years, I believe. Well, maybe 50 or 100 is a little much, but 25 years for sure. In the case of MasterCard, I bought it when it was spun out of the consortium of banks, and I invested $1 million in it. I didn't invest enough into it. But that amount of money that you see that it's worth today is a 25x on my investment. What a shame that I didn't invest a significant amount of money into it. I want to give you, I cannot talk about everything, but I want to give you talk briefly about a couple of other positions in the portfolio. About 5 years ago, maybe it's 6, I bought shares of BYD. I had some understanding of the business. I had an understanding of what an extraordinary CEO he was. I can get into all sorts of details about what I'd figured out. Also had a lot of concerns. It was China, and it's based in China. I put 4% of my portfolio into it. At the time, I believe that was around $7 or $8 million I put into. Now, 4 or 5% for me is a really interesting number, because if you lose all of your investment, you're still at 95% of what you had. If it goes down by 50%, you've lost 2.5%. But if it goes up 5x, you have made a very, very significant difference to your portfolio. And that's what happened in the case of BYD. It went up more than 5x. And so you get these positions that balloon in size. And now what I do with them is I sit on them. I don't do anything with them. Sorry, Swedbank or any brokers who want to make money off activity in the portfolio, I'm sitting in it and I'm doing absolutely nothing. And another one in the portfolio, India Energy Exchange, same idea. I invested $5 or $6 million into it. It first of all went up 5 times, and then it went down by 50%. But it's a piece of infrastructure, in this case financial infrastructure. Everybody knows OMX here, the NASDAQ group. Well, this is an exchange for electricity, which is the dominant exchange in India. And I bought it in the expectation that I will own it for the next 25 years. And I'm being a friend to the company. The fund that I manage owns around 2% of the, specifically 1.4% of the whole company. The idea that the fund that I manage owns sort of 1% of a very important element of India's electricity industry makes me really, really happy. So, but that just gives you a sense of what we own, and I give you a sense of why we own it. It's actually a new thing for me to talk about my portfolio in this way. I wanted to try it out. Anu, I hope you'll... I have a request for you. I see no problem taking photographs, no problem buying any of these shares. You know, this is what I own. I'm not making any recommendations. Grateful if you don't share it publicly or if you don't email 5,000 of your closest friends. So use it for yourself. Please don't share it or don't tweet it or something like that. That will not be helpful to me, I don't think. So grateful if you could do that. So this just gives you a sense of where I'm looking at and what I've been active in. And so when I talk to my investors, I'll talk to them about where I'm doing research, what I'm thinking about, what I've said no to, what I might add to. And I think that if I look at my next 25 years, I spent the last 25 years educating an investor group that includes my father, it includes my sister, it includes my uncle, and it also includes a group of people who I don't know so well who've joined over time. But I've educated them in the kinds of things that I'm talking about right now, and helping people to understand that often what is talked about in the business press is not what smart investing is. In the business press, people, with the greatest respect to Anu and other great journalists, they're trying to get eyeballs. And with the greatest respect to Andres, banks make less money if we don't have activity. But what I've been doing is sitting on things for an extremely long time, and it's a wonderful way to live in addition to being a smart way to invest. So, and what I've learned, and I just want to share this with you as well. So if you're approaching a possible investment, you're not going to have a green light. It's not going to be clear and certain. But in a certain way, what I've figured out, for me at least, is that I got to want to be, owning an investment is a bit like getting married. The really great thing about owning an investment is that you don't have to be loyal to just one person. Selling investment is a bit like getting a divorce. And you really don't want to get divorced. And so I think when I invest in a business, I'm not just thinking about the expected returns going out. I'm not going for the highest returns. I'm going for a business that I really want to be in a kind of relationship with. And I want to share the same values. I want to share the same values with the management team. In a certain way, I live with the management teams. I'm kind of, are they doing unusual things or not? So this idea that when we're making an investment, we're doing far more than just thinking about a future return or thinking if the valuation is good. We're thinking, or I'm trying to think, do I want to be in bed with this person? Do I want to be married to this particular company? So I've had a lot. So I would tell you in the third one down is a company called Care Ratings. I could tell you, I could go on for an hour or two, but I won't, about why the credit rating business is just an extraordinary business. And the two leading credit rating agencies in the world are Moody's and Standard & Poor's, and anybody who's done a bond issuance, maybe Andras has done some bond issuances, you need a credit rating agency to rate your bond before you can go out to the market, and it's an extraordinarily profitable business. Well, Care Ratings is the second largest ratings agency in India that doesn't have an international tie-up. And I would just tell you, it's not the best managed, and it is not the best business by far. In fact, they blotted their copybook not long ago. My fund, 2% of my fund is in that company, and in that company I own 2% of the shares, so they're approximately a 300 million market cap, a bit like me. Why do I bring it up to you? Because in this case, so of course, if you take Berkshire Hathaway or Nestlé, I look up to Berkshire Hathaway and Nestlé. I learn from them all the time. I've been attending the annual meetings of Berkshire Hathaway, and every time I come back with new lessons. In the case of Care Ratings, I feel like I can afford to, I believe that this company could improve an enormous amount. And if they do improve by an enormous amount, they might become a really, really important part of India's financial landscape. But I can only do that if they're kind of 2% of my portfolio, or 3 or 4%. If they were 20%, even if I could have the highest possible expected returns, it would drag me down. I would get too worried. It would destabilize me, if you like. I'm seeking to help the company and give it insights and connect them up to resources that will help them, while not allowing myself, if in the case that the company doesn't work out, to get dragged down by it. And I could talk about the other areas that I've sort of brought up here. And I for a second I will. I saw that one of the presenters talked about ESG, and it's a strange thing, very, very strange thing, because I'm totally behind ESG, and obviously, well, let's just be clear, I'm totally behind businessmen, managers of companies, investors taking the lead in moving to a world in which we are green, in which we're no longer putting pollutants into the atmosphere. But it's created a circumstance, all of that has created a circumstance where perhaps the best investment idea I saw this year was to go and buy American coal companies. And it's a weird thing that's happened in that insurance companies won't insure coal companies, banks won't lend to coal companies. So if you're anybody in developed world, if you want to develop a new coal mine, nobody's going to let you do it. Nobody wants to permit a new coal mine. That means that there's a shortage of capital in the industry, and if you're already in the business, you have extraordinarily high rates of return. And some of these companies, what they're doing with very low share prices is repurchasing their shares in large numbers, and those of us in the room who understand numbers will realize that that's an extraordinary situation. So I've struggled with the coal industry to try and decide where I stand. So far, I have not made an investment because I want to make money with things that help society and with help the planet, not the other way around. But I would tell you it's been really, really hard for me because this is by far not just the best investment idea I saw this year, perhaps the best investment idea I saw over the last 5 years. And I'm well known for being friends with this Indian investor, Monish Pabrai. I believe that his portfolio is now 40% these coal companies, which are already have generated an extraordinary return for him. But I will leave that. I believe that in the future, what I hope to do, next week or the week after, I'm going to be visiting Exor, which is one of our holdings. Exor is the holding company of John Elkann. I met John Elkann because he came out to the Berkshire Hathaway meeting. And although he's European and the scion of a well-known Italian family, a sort of very, very wealthy family, and John Elkann's 10 years younger than me, which makes me quite envious, really, because he's the chairman of Ferrari and I'm not. But he's running Exor, which is a kind of a Berkshire Hathaway, in the right way. And why do I bring him up? I guess I don't remember why I bring him up, but I wanted to bring him up. So there's John Elkann and Exor. I think about, well, he's one of our investments. Yeah, I'm not sure why I brought him up, but I did. I guess, one other short story that I will share with you, and I think I have time, is the story of Ferrari in my portfolio, which might be interesting to you. So I bought in 2008, I bought the shares of Fiat Chrysler. Fiat Chrysler was going through it was just Fiat actually, and to give you a sense, the revenues of Fiat were 100 billion, and the market capitalization of Fiat was 5 billion, so it was trading at this ridiculously cheap multiple of revenues, although it was loss-making. It had an incredible CEO at the helm, a guy called Sergio Marchionne, who managed to convince the US government to sell all of Chrysler to Fiat for $1, for nothing, basically, because the United States was so afraid during the financial crisis that all the Chrysler workers would be made unemployed, and it would make the crisis worse. But Sergio Marchionne did an incredible deal. 2 or 3 years out of that merger, Fiat spun out the shares of Ferrari. I didn't really understand much about Ferrari. I just knew they made cars. But I sought to understand the business. And what I learned was really quite incredible. I mean, total number of cars sold in the United States every year, I believe, is about 20 million. Ferrari sells about 14,000 cars a year. The number is absolutely minuscule. And I've not owned a Ferrari myself, but my friend Monish ended up buying one, and he took me through what the buyer experience is like and what the owner experience is like. And I started to understand that a Ferrari is not a car as much as it is an experience. It's a tool to make middle-aged men feel great about themselves. And middle-aged men with spending power will probably spend any amount of money to feel great about themselves. And there's something that it seems that a Ferrari does that pretty much no other car does. And in this process, I tried to understand companies like Aston Martin and McLaren. But I drove once on the highway in the United States in a Ferrari, and I was blown away by how many heads turned. I mean, it is not a car company, it's actually a luxury goods company. As a result of learning and understanding what happens when somebody buys a luxury good, I've started investigating the luxury goods space, and you can see that LVMH is there, and Hermes, and Piquadro, these are all publicly traded companies. I haven't bought any of them yet. I'm still not, I think the shares are not very well valued, but I'm trying to understand those businesses. So what's my point to people in this room is that you make your bed and then you sleep in it, as something that I think somebody said. You make your portfolio and then you sleep in it. Choose your relationship. So I developed a relationship with Ferrari, an understanding of Ferrari, as a result of it being spun out to me. I no longer own the shares of Fiat or its successor, Stellantis. And then as I started to understand it, I started to look for other similar businesses that maybe would come to me at a cheaper price. The same kind of thing happened to me with the credit rating agency. In this room, think of yourselves not as investors, but owners of businesses. Think of yourselves as owning businesses for the financial security of yourselves, your families, but also of Estonia. Estonia should be invested in aggregate in some of the best businesses in the world. That will do, it's a patriotic thing to do that, if you like. So, I think I'm going to end on this because we want to leave time for questions. And I'm not going to go, I don't want to flick through slides, but I just want to come back to this idea, and I'm going to share it with you this way. There's a book whose author's name escapes me. It's titled Finite and Infinite Games. And I just want to share this idea with you. It's extremely powerful. So what's a finite game? Any game with a set of rules that has a winner or a loser is a finite game. So we get onto the soccer pitch, we play according to the rules, there's a referee, At the end of the game, one side's won, the other side's lost, according to the rules. Chess is a finite game. You show up at the board, you have a time control, you play your moves in order. There are moves that are allowed, there are moves that are not allowed. At the end of the game, there's a winner and a loser. There are many, many different kinds of finite games. Okay, so what is an infinite game? In an infinite game, there is no winner or loser. All that happens is that somebody ends up deciding to leave the game. The infinite game par excellence that is relevant, I think, to anybody who's lived in Europe was the Cold War. There were no rules. Might have taken place in Vietnam War, there might have been something in Grenada, Russia tries to put missiles in Cuba, spies are sent home, spies are not sent home. What was the goal of the game? The goal of the game was to stay in the game. Ultimately, Russia left the game. They weren't declared a loser. United States and the free world weren't declared winners. Russia left the game, or the Soviet Union left the game. Investing and many things in life, too many people think of them as a finite game, but investing is not a finite game. It's an infinite game. The goal is to remain in the game. If we can remain in the process of investing intelligently, of owning good businesses, of not trading the portfolio too much, of not exposing ourselves to anything that will stop us from being in the game, we ought to do just fine. So to be in the game and to stay in the game, it's a different set of rules. And I think that many people show up to the game not even realizing that they're playing an infinite game, not a finite game. How do you get kicked out? So, and I think I will end on this point, because I've gone for far too long. I have a group of friends, at least 15 people, who all started doing the same thing that I'm doing. And if I would have told them in 25 years, I'm going to be the only member of that group of friends who's still doing it, and if I would have told them, by the way, my annualized returns will only be 9%, they would have laughed at me. But how did they get kicked out of the game? One I know got kicked out of the game because he put all of his money into one stock, all of his investors' money into one stock called MCF. It was a natural gas company. He was expecting the gas price to go from $2 to $10 and for his company to go from wherever it was to a far higher price. But it went the other way, and he ended up without a fund and without much asset. So too much concentration. In another case, it was leverage. In another case, it was buying speculative stocks. In another case, it was trading too much. And there are many, many ways in which we can get pushed out of the game, and we just have to study those ways and make sure that we don't do them, because if we just stay in, we're going to do fine. That also includes the kinds of businesses that we own. They should not be leveraged. They should not be taking undue risks. And so with that, I will stop so that we have time for some questions. Thank you very much for listening in. I hope this has been helpful. Let's see where we go here.
Thank you very much.
Miss all of these.
Interesting.
Yeah, look at this. I just want to get to the last slide. You don't get to see all of this. Sorry, man. I'll leave it there.
Well, we have quite a few questions for you. When Buffett is no longer in this world and his brain power vanishes together with him, would Berkshire Hathaway still remain as a good investment as it is today?
So I will answer that question after I've taken a sip of water. I know the answer, by the way, is that, you know how you want to make anybody look really, really smart? Put them as the CEO of Berkshire Hathaway today. And, I tell you, just before we go to Berkshire Hathaway, I just tell you, Coca-Cola. Any person in this room could run Coca-Cola for the next decade, and it would do absolutely fine, believe me. At the end of a decade, there'd be more people drinking Coca-Cola around the world. The company would be more profitable. I visited one of the Coca-Cola bottlers in Istanbul, CCI. You know, the per capita consumption of Coca-Cola in places like Pakistan is so small and is just going to increase. So that's Coca-Cola. Why do I say that? Because it's an easy case to make. What I would tell you is that, you know, Warren Buffett gets up in the morning. I don't know what time he gets to the office. Many days he doesn't do a huge amount, and he goes home. You think that Warren Buffett, with a company that is a market cap between $500 billion and $1 trillion, he can have that much influence? He's created an environment where anybody running that company would do pretty well. So, you know, if you want to make me the CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, believe me, the company will make me look like a genius. How did I do?
Great. So how are aquamarine results compared to the Nasdaq 100 index?
You know, I haven't done that calculation. I don't actually know, but I can answer it slightly differently. Before I do that, I just want to go into why Berkshire Hathaway would make even me look like a genius. So, and I want to go into some microeconomics before I get to and forgive me, but this is fun for me. If anybody enjoys this kind of analysis, get in touch with me afterwards. So, one of the businesses I've owned in the past was a company that owned natural gas pipelines, crisscrossing the Midwest of the United States, and especially connecting up to shale mining, but also just connecting up to natural gas storage facilities and connecting up to natural gas takeoff terminals in the Bay of Mexico. If you're in that business, now some plant or some shale mine or some industrial customer needs a pipeline. So if I'm already in that business, I already have a bunch of assets in place. And my cost to make the investments to connect that person up to my pre-existing network of assets is far lower, and my rate of return is far more certain than, for example, somebody who decides to bid and they don't own any assets. They would have to construct every single thing. And in many cases, they wouldn't get any interconnects. So there are businesses which, once you're in them, are like shooting fish in a barrel. You're just in easier time to make a return in those businesses. And in the case of Berkshire Hathaway, it is in so many different businesses like that. And when I try to analyze a business, I am looking at how does the economics of the business set the CEO up in such a way that they don't have to think too hard and still make an enormous amount of money or make high returns on their reinvested capital. Not all businesses are the same. Some are extremely difficult, and it's very hard to make those kinds of incremental returns. And some businesses are incredible. I won't talk about the previous company, but if I'm in the real estate business, you don't have that aspect of my existing assets support new assets. Every new piece of real estate, somewhere where I invest in a new hotel, I have to do the whole analysis again. I have to analyze the location. I have to analyze the brands. I have to analyze the market demand. The fact that I own 20 hotels already may help me a little bit because I can provide the management, but there are all sorts of things that are uncertain. So in general, pipelines versus hotels, one is an easier business. Nasdaq, I don't know the returns. I don't spend an enormous amount of time comparing myself to an index. I would tell you that I chose the S&P and the MSCI for reasons that I can kind of understand, but still are disappointing to me. Over the last 5 years, I have not outperformed the S&P, and I've barely outperformed the MSCI. Now, is that a concern? And my answer is, of course it's a concern. I would rather show up here and say, yeah, I've got these incredible returns. But there are reasons why. There are two things. First of all, I may not be that great an investor. And we will only know at the end of my life. And even then, we won't really know. Because maybe if my returns were high, I took enormous risks. And I took enormous risks, but they didn't come back to eat me alive. So what am I trying to say? Like every single person in the room who's investing their portfolio, I cannot instantly become the person who beats the index safely. And if I today try and take actions that will help me to beat the NASDAQ. I might beat it for a year or two, and then I'll have my head handed to me. So I need to make decisions that will help me over the course of the rest of my life. I'm not going to allow myself to get distracted by, Guy, if you only owned Microsoft and whatever it is, NVIDIA, and those stocks are running, so you need to own those to outperform this year or next year. Even if there's a 0.01% risk that I manage to get out of them before those share prices collapse, I'm not going to do it. The most important thing, in a way, and I'll leave you with this for the next question, is not to outperform the NASDAQ. Although it's nice if it happens. It's not to outperform any index. It's not to get in the way of compounding. We'll find out at the end of my life how I did. But if I underperform the index, but I still compound, that is still a great result.
So that kind of answers one of the questions that was posted. Why don't you have Microsoft or any other of the big seven directly?
So because I'm not smart enough? Just kidding. So I'll tell you the story that for me is most painful. And one of the 25 principles, by the way, is rub your nose in your mistakes. So around 2004-05, I met a friend at Berkshire Hathaway, a guy called Steve Wallman. He lives in Madison, Wisconsin. He's a very smart guy, very thoughtful guy, had been studying Warren Buffett for a very long time. And he talks to me about Apple. This is 3 or 4 years before the iPhone comes out. And he says to me something very simple. He says, I've been looking at this company, and what I can see is that the Wintel system is not very good with images, it's not very good with videos, it's kind of clunky with that. It's good for spreadsheets, good for word processing, it's good for a corporate environment. But I see that all these creative types, they all love their Mac, and Mac has all this software that really helps them with things like images and videos and all the things that these creative types want to do. And he said to me, he had one simple insight. He said, I think that people prefer working with images and videos and with that sleek interface than the Windows interface. And my response to him was, yeah, but I don't do tech. So I looked at it, and at the time, there's been multiple times when Apple has not been very expensive. It's been a cheap stock. And during those times, Berkshire Hathaway bought an enormous amount of Apple. And it was only when I discovered that Berkshire Hathaway had bought it that I kind of figured out, wow, you've been had blinders on. You've had this stupid idea that you're not going to do tech. And they're Warren Buffett because you worship at the altar of Warren Buffett, and there Warren Buffett went and did tech. So part of the reason why I don't own Apple is that I'd learned so much from Warren Buffett, and I thought my criteria were maladjusted. So that is the answer for Apple.
That's a good lesson.
It is a good lesson. It's a great lesson. I'd rather have owned the shares than learned the lesson, but there we go. In the case of Google, again, I was very late to understand that they had an extraordinary moat around their business, which people were fearful up to recently that moat would be challenged by AI. And people are still not quite, I don't quite understand exactly what happens when you have AI agents rather than Google search. And but what really bothered me when I looked at it seriously for investing was that the management team, and this is where I think that I urge you to consider not just the metrics, but to consider it as a kind of a marriage decision. Do I really want to be in a business where the founders and the CEO, then it was Eric Schmidt, are investing enormous amounts of money in these moonshot projects that I think we're now pretty sure are not going to work out for the shareholders of Google? I kind of just didn't want to be married to those tech guys. So I'm not interested in the allocators of capital, the CEOs of my businesses, to be people who are looking for fun out of investing or looking to aggrandize themselves in some way. I want them kind of to be boring people who care about allocating capital correctly. I don't think that was the case with the guys at Google. But the bottom line is, and we could go through every single one, is to some degree my filters were wrong and my units of analysis were wrong. And in another sense, So two companies that I ended up owning in 2020, I think around then I bought them. So it's the COVID crisis, markets have gone haywire, there's a bunch of things that have gone down. And I decide, because I see that everybody's going to work from home and shares like Zoom have gone through the roof, and I don't own any of these companies that are benefiting from that. So I decide to buy shares in two companies. I actually bought some Google to try and understand. There's something that happens when you own the shares of a company. So I'll buy 1% of the portfolio and see if I want to take it up to 4 or 5%, or maybe I will sell it. So I bought shares of Google and I bought Twitter. I can tell you that I did not understand what a difficult business Twitter is. I was so grateful when Elon Musk decided to buy it, and I was happy to sell him my shares. But I think that the answer for this room is that I don't have to. So if you're a journalist like Arno, you need to write about what people want to read about. So, you're going to end up writing about NVIDIA because everybody wants to read about NVIDIA. Everybody wants to read about Microsoft and what's going on with OpenAI. That is, and if you think that you want to educate yourself on investing, you're going to open the newspaper and you're going to see stories about NVIDIA and you're going to see stories about OpenAI. You're not going to see much about Nestle. It's just not that interesting. Or if you want to own shares of Ferrari, you're going to see a lot about how Ferrari has won yet another Formula One race to either Verstappen or Mercedes or somebody, but you're not going to see much about the business. And so what journalists do and what we need to do as investors is very, very different. And again, I hope this is helpful. Talk to everyone, see what's being talked about, read the newspapers, but then also at some point go to a place where it's you and your portfolio and your future. Is this the vehicle that I want to get married to that will take me through to the next 25 years? Are these the group of people that I want to be around? It doesn't matter whether they're talked about in the newspaper or not.
Our official time is running out, but there are so many questions that I'd still love to ask, so I'm going to take at least two, and let's try to add a bit of tempo here. How do you feel about
Sorry,
investing?
tempo means shorter answers.
Shorter. If you can.
I can try.
Let's try. How do you feel about investing in emerging economies like China? Would you invest in there?
I've thought I have a big investment in BYD, and I also have a very small investment in Alibaba, and I have an investment in Tencent. Those are 1% investments. So who likes the tensions between the United States and China? Who wants to see what was wrong with the world that we had 20 years ago when the United States never challenged the One China policy and China never took any actions to implement the One China policy? We live in a different world. The United States is being challenged, certainly by Russia and Iran, possibly by China. But here's what I come out to. In that rivalry, in that competition, even if, God forbid, it would come to a war, which I don't think it will, is it in the interest of either country to engage in what Niall Ferguson, the historian, has called mutually assured financial destruction? So if the United States starts seeking to treat Chinese holders of American government borrowing differently to other investors, if China starts to try and treat investors in its companies differently, foreign investors in its companies differently to local investors, that would be mutually assured financial destruction. No sane person would do it. No sane government would do it. So I am relying on the sanity of the Chinese government. And who knows, the Communist Party in the past has done some really dumb things. But I I believe, I'd like to say it's 80% belief or maybe even 90% belief. There is a certain amount of hope in there as well, that they won't do dumb things. It's not in their interest to do it. I'll stop because I can go on and on.
Okay. One last question then, perhaps. Where in the economic cycle are we currently at? Because we tried to think about what's ahead of us in 2024. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So first easy answer is I don't know. I really don't know. Second easy answer is it doesn't matter. Really, it doesn't matter. Get invested in good businesses that can live through the cycle, and don't let that idiotic stuff about where we are in the cycle influence us. But having said that, who likes a rise in interest rates when countries like the United States and others in the Western world have taken on enormous amounts of debt to deal with COVID? And who likes the fact that now we're being challenged in various different places, in Ukraine, in Israel, possibly in the Taiwan Straits, and that may require yet more military expenditure, yet more indebtedness with higher interest rates and already existing amount of indebtedness. So that doesn't feel very good, does it? But I think that we underestimate the number of levers that, let's just take the United States, has to deal with the high level of indebtedness. The number of, at the end of the day, the US government has a call option on every single asset in the United States. There are 1,000 different ways the United States could get the debt levels down. 1,000. There are many different ways. There are also ways in which the United States can renege on different groups. For example, if transfer payments and Social Security obligations are too high, there are ways that the United States can renege on that and reduce its obligations that way. So, does that mean that we're about to hit a financial crisis? I really don't know. I don't think it's worth investing on the basis that we're about to hit a financial crisis. We know, so just two things and I'll stop, and I just tell you that my poor wife, she has to deal with me all the time. You just have to deal with me in an afternoon. And then a good friend of mine, as I got into this, she said I was going to talk to her about something. I said, do you mind if I tell you something? She said, yeah, in 20 words or less. I can't do anything in 20 words or less, but debt, indebtedness, credit grows as economies grow. So somebody who simply points to increasing indebtedness, and there are all sorts of measures of it. You have government debt outstanding, but and debt can be counted 2 or 3 times because there's, for example, if I have some credit card debt outstanding to a credit card company or to a bank and then they take that money and they take that off their balance sheet and they securitize in some way, then that the underlying asset will have various different ways in which the nominal amount is being counted more and more times. What's my point? As economies grow, the amount of credit available in the economy grows. In India, they're seeking to make credit more available to people. So simply seeing an increase in the amount of debt that's outstanding is not enough to get really excited and start saying the crisis is coming, even though, and Anu is not one of these, but there are journalists who will seek to get eyeballs by scaring the hell out of you, by convincing you that the crash is about to come, because look at all this debt outstanding and look at the rise in interest rates, and therefore, certainly read the article, but don't do anything or sell all your stocks because the crisis is about to come. And I guess I will end on this. Sooner or later, there will be some kind of crisis. Sooner or later, there will be some kind of sudden decline. Sooner or later, we will look at our portfolios, as I did in 2008, and discover that it's down by a lot. And the goal is for us to be set up in such a way that we can live through that, to continue with the compounding. And the goal today is not to allow undue fears to prevent us from owning a piece of the world's great businesses.
Ladies and gentlemen, Guy Spiers, thank you so much for this conversation.